Hello, my name is Christina and welcome to my channel if you're new here, and welcome back if you've been here before. If you haven't yet, I would appreciate if you subscribe to my channel. You can do that by clicking on the little subscribe button down below, and then if you click on the bell next to it, you can choose to get notifications, and then YouTube will let you know whenever I have a new video up. Also, if you could like and share this video, that would also be greatly appreciated too, because it lets other people know about the video either directly by you or by YouTube bumping it up in the list because you liked it. They're like, hey, maybe other people will like it, and they'll promote it out to other people. So in this video, I'm going to be reviewing Goodbye, Good Men. Now this book came out almost 20 years ago. It came out in 2001-2002 timeframe, and the research done for this book spanned from, I'd say, the late 60s going into the 70s, pretty much from right after Vatican II on. This book has so much information in it, it's just wow. I was inspired to read it because I had read Taylor Marshall's Infiltration, and this goes into more detail about what caused the sort of infiltration in the church as far as the homosexual front. And this book covers a lot of stuff. It has 13 chapters to it. It took me a little over a week to read it, but then there were a few days I just didn't get to read it at all because I was so busy with family stuff and taxes and such. The chapters go by the title of A Man-Made Crisis, Stifling the Call, The Gatekeeper Phenomenon, The Gay Subculture, The Heterodoxy Downer, Poo-Pooing Piety, Go See the Shrink, The Vocational Inquisition, Confronting the Obstacles, Heads in the Sand, A Self-Fulfilling Prophecy, The Right Stuff, and Where the Men Are. One thing that this book very much intensely covers is the infiltration into the seminaries of homosexuality. And a lot of the seminaries you can't get in if you're not a homosexual, or if you're not a homosexual, if you're not sympathetic to the cause. Another thing is women's ordination. You have to either be for or neutral, I guess. Basically not carry the way about the idea of women's ordination. The three main things that I found that are pushed a lot in this book, it says, are homosexuality, women's ordination, and allowing a married priesthood. And if you don't agree with any of those, it's difficult to get into the seminaries. And if you do get in, life is very hard. In many of the seminaries, there's also issues with sexual harassment from the homosexuals that are in the seminary. I actually asked on my Facebook page to see if anyone had been in seminary recently, if this sort of thing is still going on. And I actually did get some replies back, and know some people locally who they felt the call to the priesthood, and when they went to the seminary to see about getting in, they were turned away because they weren't gay. They weren't into that sort of thing. They were very orthodox. Pretty much what it comes down to is if you're loyal to the magisterium, tradition, and scripture, you're loyal to the papacy, they're not going to let you in. There are some good seminaries, which are featured at the very back of the book, but they're few and far between. I actually know someone who, when he was in seminary, he was raped, gang raped specifically, and nothing was done about it. And he was pretty much told to just keep quiet about it, and that's not right. And there are several stories in this book about men who would go to the seminary and either they'd be weeded out. So there's like this mental game going on that they're constantly on your case to try and weed you out if you're Orthodox. In many of the seminaries, the rosary is discouraged, Eucharistic adoration is discouraged, and general piety is discouraged. And I've actually lived now in two of the dioceses where this has been sort of a heavy problem, because I grew up in the Archdiocese of Cincinnati, And then I now live in the Diocese of Youngstown. And Cincinnati was featured quite a bit in this book in their seminary. And then in this book, they also talk about the vocational director for the Diocese of Youngstown back in like 1998, 1999, and the struggle he was having recruiting people to go to the seminary. And it was once again one of the situations where he tried to avoid those who are too orthodox and too pious because he didn't think that they would be able to work with social justice, as if priests don't work to help people. And he actually had written an article that was published in a local Catholic newspaper here, saying that, hey, we have no vocations, we're trying to reach out and advertise, but no one's responding. And he got a response back from other local priests, one of which I have found out, who's very orthodox, and said, hey, you reap what you sow. He's still in this general area. He's actually at a church in Akron. And so my husband and I are thinking about going to check it out. There's a list, basically, not like categorized, itemized list, but a list in this book, if you read through it, of the various seminaries that had issues. They also talk about ones that have closed down for lack of seminarians because of the fact that they were just so very liberal. An interesting thing I did discover, though, is that in Vatican II, there was basically a list. There was guidelines put out for how the seminaries should be and how priests should be. And it wasn't obeyed at all. I mean, it was basically either reinterpreted or misinterpreted, basically just cast aside, and the seminaries here had come up with their own idea of, oh, well, this is what it really means. And I was kind of shocked by that. Pope John Paul II actually wrote an exhortation about what a priest should be and how the seminaries should be. And there was another book that I discovered by reading this book that I purchased that actually talks about what a priest's job is. So I found this really interesting. I mean, if not for the content alone, and there's a lot of content in this. This is probably about the 4th book that I've read in the last month that is just so content and information packed. It doesn't drag. I mean, it's just loaded with information. This one, in the process of reading it, I think I found now 3 books I'd like to read, one of which I have actually ordered. It was rather an expensive one, so not a big deal. But that one was about how priests should behave, what the duties of a priest are. So I'd like to see, what has actually been laid out as a priest's duties, because there seems to be some controversy these days about what a priest's job actually is. So I'll see how it's been laid out. That'll probably be in another month or so, because I have to wait for the book to get here. One of the best chapters in this book is actually the second to last one. It's chapter 12. And that one, it does a profile of an exemplary priest and how priests should be. It was about St. John Vianney. He is the patron saint of parish priests. And he's phenomenal. And the funny thing is that he was a post-Council of Trent priest. So he had to go to seminary. Because seminary, they weren't even around. Seminaries did not exist until after the Council of Trent. Council of Trent is the one that set up that there would be seminaries. And in the seminary, he was considered rather dumb. They didn't think that he was suitable to be a parish priest. So it was a while before he got sent off to Ars to be the cure of Ars. And while there, he did penance for his people. He offered up suffering to God for the conversion of his parish, and they had been a long time there without having a priest. So they needed it. But he was able to convert the souls of his parish. He fasted a lot. He slept very little. He was a great confessor. People would actually make pilgrimages to go see him and to confess their sins to him and get spiritual guidance. And so the person that the seminary was going to reject as, oh, he's, in that time even, too orthodox, ended up being a stellar, phenomenal priest and now a saint. And that was actually one of the things I noticed in that chapter, is they talked about how there was, I believe it's called Janinism, and he rejected it. And so it's kind of like in the seminaries back then, there were even sort of, scandals and heresies. And that was the one that affected the time back then. And he rejected it, which kind of put the seminarians off with him and the seminary leader. And he was a solid priest, and he guided the souls. Of course, what he went through kind of shows that the more things change, the more they stay the same. So there were problems even back then at the very beginning of when there were seminaries. And a good priest fought through and made it, and now he's a saint. And if you question, there's probably no issues nowadays with the seminaries, and seminaries have been all cleaned up and fine. No. In fact, there's an article that came out with complicit clergy called Bombshell Letter Alleges Culture of Sexual Misconduct at Pontifical North American College. And it talks about the same exact stuff going on there that was talked about in this book. So clearly it hasn't been completely cleaned up. It's still there. The most bursting seminaries are generally the orthodox ones. The ones that are sort of dying out or have low student amounts or low vocations and low graduation rate and lack of priests. The dioceses that are hurting the most are the most liberal ones. And when you get into seminary, some of the courses that are taught are just... It's no wonder that these days, when people are looking for good holy priests to lead them, that they have such a problem with it, because they aren't teaching them what they need to teach them in the seminaries, at least not in the liberal ones, and there's a lot more of them than there are the orthodox ones. There was one seminary that was highlighted, I believe it's called Mount St. Mary, which is not to be confused with St. Mary's, and that was one of the things that was discussed in this book. But this one particular seminary is where, on the East Coast, a lot of parishes, or I guess the vocations director, will send potential seminarians because the seminary is that good. It is bursting at the seams. And that was in 2002 timeframe, so I doubt it's dwindled. But it's a very interesting read if you want to know what's been going on, because like I said, not a lot has changed. And it's sad in a way, but it also explains why it is that when Catholics can pray for good and holy priests, for God to send vocations, it's not that he's not sending vocations. He's sending lots of them. But the liberal seminaries reject the candidates, sometimes just destroying them. And part of the problem is that when a candidate for a seminary goes to the seminary, they have to do an interview. And oftentimes they have to do a test. And if that seminary decides, okay, you're not seminary material, they can pretty much get blacklisted. Part of the problem is that if that person then goes to another seminary to apply, they'll say, have you ever been in seminary or applied to another seminary? And they'll have to say yes. And then that seminary will check with the previous one. And if the previous one says, oh yeah, they were horrible, they had psychological issues, guess what? You don't get in. And then it's done. One fellow, he had worked initially with a very liberal one, got kicked out of seminary because he was orthodox, and they kicked him out because of his aversion to homosexuality and the activities that were going on at the seminary. And he applied to get into another seminary. They understood the situation. They were going to welcome him in. But he was so scarred from the previous seminary, they just couldn't bring himself around to going to that one. But yeah, there's stories in this book of situations where a seminarian was raped and left the seminary and even had a hard time going to church afterwards. And there are stories of some of the curriculum that was handed out to the seminarians that was, let's be honest, it was pornographic. And when the Orthodox seminarians would object to it, they'd get backlash for it. And in this book, it talks about Pope John Paul II, concerned because of the complaints that were coming from American Catholics. He actually had a commission go around and check out the seminaries to see what was really going on, if there was an issue. The problem is that they didn't do surprise visits. There was a schedule set up, and it was a conservative bishop who was actually in charge. And one person that was really excited about, hey, yeah, this guy's conservative, talked about how he was thrilled that there was this commission going on, and the bishop replied to him and said, let's not make this a witch hunt, which was very concerning, because it's like, what do you mean let's not make this a witch hunt? It's not a witch hunt. There's a problem. They were there to investigate, and he clearly wasn't wanting anything to come out, which is weird if he was considered conservative. But they didn't do surprise visits. They did scheduled visits, which meant that the bad seminaries had time to clean up their act for a little bit, put out the books and the encyclicals that were supposed to be on display, wear their collars, which was very uncommon. At a lot of these seminaries, the clerics didn't wear their cassocks or their collars. And so they cleaned up their act, only let the gay seminarians talk to the visiting priests and bishops of the commission. And so they only got a slanted story. And if there was one seminary where a person went in to sign up and they had to put down their name and why they wanted to talk to one of the bishops that was on the commission, and they were told if there's enough time left. And they'd also be harassed for the fact that they were signing up, which meant that they didn't get a lot of the information. So when they finally did the report and turned it in, they're like, oh yeah, the American seminaries are great. Well, yeah, if you're not doing surprise visits, you're not going to see the real stuff, because they're going to hide all the bad stuff so that they can look good. So in that instance, a lot of stuff didn't get cleaned up. And I can see now why things are the way they are with the way the seminaries have been infiltrated. Because when you get those people who are so liberal in the seminaries, they're only going to promote up each other and like-minded individuals, and they're able to keep the orthodox ones out. And then when you keep the orthodox ones out, you're not going to produce good, solid, holy priests. There's so much more information in this book than I can even possibly think to tell you. So I do highly recommend getting it if you can. Again, it is Goodbye, Goodmen: How Liberals Brought Corruption into the Catholic Church by Michael S. Rose. It's a phenomenal book, and it will really enlighten you on what's going on in the seminaries and why there's an issue with lack of priests. It's not a lack of men who want to be priests and would be good Orthodox priests. It's a matter of them not being able to get into or get through seminary because the liberals that are in there that are blocking them. So I hope you made it this far through the review, and I hope I got you interested in this book, because it's really, really worth the read. If you haven't yet, please click subscribe down below. If you could, please click the like button. I'd appreciate that too. And I will see you in my next video.